Hello and welcome to TriSchool's 30th anniversary celebration. I'm James Shaheen, TriSchool's editor-in-chief. This is the fourth live session in a series that we'll host through next week, and we'll be talking with many of the people, old friends and new, who have helped to make TriSchool a success over the years. Today's session will be recorded for anyone who is unable to attend live. You can view any of the previous session recordings at the link we're at now. Beginning this Thursday, April 22nd, we will be moving the remaining 30th anniversary events from Crowdcast to Zoom. I'm sure a lot of you will be happy about that. Since you have already registered for the series, you will be automatically registered for the Zoom webinars. Please keep an eye out for the email from us with a Zoom link for the upcoming sessions. We will have some time for Q&A towards the end of this hour-long session. You can ask a question by typing it into the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of the screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can. Our guest today is Duncan Ryuken Williams. Duncan is a Soto Zen priest, writer, scholar, and director of the Shinso Ito Center for Japanese Religions and Culture at the University of Southern California. He previously served as the Buddhist chaplain at Harvard University. Duncan is the author of The Other Side of Zen, a social history of Soto Zen Buddhism in Tokugawa, Japan, and American Sutra, a story of faith and freedom in the Second World War. Duncan is also a longtime TriSchool contributor and has always been generous to us with his advice and guidance, so thank you, Duncan, for that. Duncan will speak to us about spiritual and racial reparations from an Asian American perspective. And last, you can join Duncan on May 4th by supporting May We Gather, a National Buddhist Memorial Ceremony for Asian American ancestors, to be live streamed on Tuesday, May 4th, 2021 at 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Learn more at maywegather.org. The link will be in the chat, and Duncan's going to be telling us more about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Duncan. I'll disappear for a while until we have a Q&A. So thanks again, Duncan, and you can take it from here.
Thank you so much, James, for that kind introduction. And I'm so glad to be able to join you and everyone at TriSchool for this auspicious occasion of the 30th anniversary. I had the privilege as a young graduate student to have my very first publication. It wasn't a peer-reviewed journal article, but a review piece in TriSchool magazine on a magazine of an earlier era that Japanese Americans had organized called The Light of Dharma. And that was my first ever published work. So TriSchool, thank you so much. It was nearly 30 years ago when that piece came out. And I've been so very appreciative of the magazine in all the decades, and especially what it's doing today in terms of covering very broadly the American Buddhist experience and the global stories that those of us based in the United States appreciate. So I wanted to today talk a little bit about some of the reflections and considerations I've been having from a kind of Asian American Buddhist perspective, especially in these recent times when we've had an uptick in anti-Asian animus and violence. And we also are reminded, unfortunately, very frequently of this, police kind of brutality or violence around Black Americans. Of course, we just concluded in Minneapolis the trial of Derek Chauvin for his killing of George Floyd, and then what happened last weekend, yet another incident. So we have these kind of patterns or incidents that keep happening. Sometimes in the Asian American community, sometimes in African American community, sometimes in Latin, so many different communities where I wanted to talk today about what can we as Buddhists do when we're told we don't belong, or when we're told that our religion is, our faith tradition is un-American. And to that end, I wanted to come to you today with a message and also hopefully some conversation with all of you about how do we repair, how do we take the karma that our nation has given us in our very bodies and minds in terms of race in America. How do we take that and start some healing and repair work from a Buddhist vantage point? And so I hope to do that in conversation with all of you who are listening. I would love to take your questions and comments to do that discussion. But today, in terms of my formal presentation, I thought I would like to read the text of a announcement or a invitation for what James mentioned, this gathering on May the 4th. That myself and several other people from the Asian American Buddhist community, Chinzing Han, Funisu, Bishop Noriaki Ito of the Higashi Honganji Temple in Los Angeles, we've been kind of planning this gathering. And so what I thought I'd like to do today is kind of read the text of it and use it as if it were a sutra or a text that is that will be enhanced by some commentary. And so if you don't mind, that's going to be the kind of format I'm going to take for this presentation, is read some text and then just provide a little bit of extra background, context, some commentary, and then open it up to conversing with you about the matters that I try to highlight in this presentation. So what this gathering on May the 4th, 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, is called a National Buddhist Memorial Ceremony for Asian American Ancestors. And I hope as I read this text, it'll become clear to you why there are those of us who felt this is a necessary gathering, a bringing together of our American Buddhist community. And so let me start with the first paragraph of the text, which reads, "May we gather. When someone is hurting, we come together as community. We gather because our lives are inextricably interlinked, and it's because we do not suffer alone, nor do we heal alone. Only when we gather as a sangha, community, can we truly support each other's freedom." And so this opening thought, it has to do with the fact that I think so for many of us who either directly or know of many family members or other people who have been hurt by the recent uptick in anti-Asian violence and assaults on, our parents or grandparents' generation as they take their daily walks and so forth. People are worried and hurting about when they can go outside and so forth. And, we wanted to open this idea that from a Buddhist vantage point, this is not just a problem for families that have elderly Asian grandparents, but it's actually an issue for all of us because our lives are inextricably interlinked, or our community as a nation, as a community at large is interlinked. And so our invitation was that it's not just that we may be interlinked through suffering, but we are actually interlinked through healing, or how we heal these type of situations is something that can't be done alone, but it's better done together. And so that to me is the kind of why we have as one of our three treasures in Buddhism, the Sangha. There's a story I always recall from Hoichi Suzuki Roshi, the son of Suzuki Shunryu Roshi, who was trying to explain what is the Sangha. And his example was, it's like when you're trying to at a monastery clean the potatoes, you can either take off the little buds and the kind of dirt and clean one by one, or you can put a whole bunch of potatoes in a bucket. And yes, the water may be a little bit cold, but you kind of rub the potatoes up against each other, and that rubbing up against each other is what cleans the potatoes. And he says that's the sangha. And so that's one of the things I think we bring as Buddhists is opening, a perspective that says we can clean each other, we can rub up against each other, we can be in community together, and it's by being together that we actually help each other to find liberation, that it's better done together than alone. So that's the kind of how I wanted to start this statement or invitation is that we have something very beautiful in Buddhism called sangha, and we should remember it not just in terms of how we can relate to each other when things are difficult, but how we relate to each other to help each other become free. So the next paragraph says, may we gather to remember. When our Chinese immigrant ancestors came to the United States in the 1850s, we faced exclusion and violence. Our Buddhist temples and Taoist temples desecrated and set ablaze. When our Japanese-American forebears were herded into US concentration camps in the 1940s, our priests were classified as a threat to national security, our Buddhist faith deemed un-American. And when our South and Southeast Asian parents and grandparents arrived on these shores in the 1970s, many fleeing wars inflamed by the American military, we were told our cultures and Buddhist traditions didn't belong. So one of the things that I wanted to, this is my commentary now on that paragraph, is that the recent uptick in anti-Asian violence, some people talk about it as if during this coronavirus pandemic period, and the talk about the Chinese flu, and we had a president who focused on this kind of nativist language that affected people at the southern border of the United States, but also affected Muslims or affected Chinese and more broadly the Asian American community, as if we didn't belong. We can't just say this is a contemporary or a Trump era problem. That in fact, the idea that America is a essentially white and Christian nation has a much, much longer history. Yes, we saw a certain kind of manifestation of that idea of a singular or supremacist race and a singular and sometimes supremacist kind of vision of salvation attainable only through one religion. That kind of idea can manifest in very contemporary modern forms. Sometimes even, some of those people who were at the January 6th insurrection in the nation's capital, we saw that kind of language kind of come back in this kind of nativist form that has different iterations in different centuries. But this is very old, this idea that essentially this nation was founded, built on one kind of nation, and so one kind of ethnicity and one kind of religion. But I think what we Buddhists have often tried to do is to have a different vision of what is America. One that, especially with the early Asian American Buddhists that came, they had to struggle so much to assert that they belong, to assert that America is indeed a nation of multiplicity, people coming from different parts of the world, different faith traditions, different national origins, and that's what composes the nation. And I'm often reminded when we think back historically, the first, exclusion of a peoples from America in terms of immigration, federal immigration law, was the 1881 Chinese Exclusion Act. And when we go back to that period of history, we remember all of these incidents of arson that many Chinese temples faced. There were many lynchings and many massacres of Chinese miners in like Wyoming, or here in where I am in Los Angeles, the massacres of Chinese in the Chinatown. Like this happened routinely. And so this kind of animus and violence is not new at all. But back then, there's one voice that really stood up for Chinese Americans that was perhaps a little bit unexpected. The former slave and well-known abolitionist Frederick Douglass made a speech in Boston a few years prior to the law passing, the exclusion law passing, where he made, it's a well-known speech called the Composite Nation speech, in which he talks about the nation being composed of people from many different faiths and many different backgrounds. And he made this forceful argument for why the Chinese should be welcomed in the United States of America. And it was a powerful vision of America that I think Buddhist people have also, in their own centuries of trying to belong in the American world that seems to have this kind of like Anglo-Protestant normativity at its center. It's something that Buddhists have countered with a different vision of America, one that is interlinked, one that is multiple, and this is why we wanted to have this kind of comment about this longue durée history of America and its idea, and why what is happening today is linked back as far back as the 1850s, when the first Buddhist temples were established by the Chinese immigrants to this country. So let me now move to the next set of paragraphs with some commentary. So the next paragraph says, Asian Americans are now experiencing another wave of religious bigotry and racial animus. We have witnessed a stark increase in violent attacks over the past year. The March 16th Atlanta shootings claimed the lives of 8 people, 6 of them women of Asian descent, including the 63-year-old Buddhist Yong Ai-wei. She is remembered by her 2 sons as a selfless person who stood up against discrimination and always advocated for treating people right. Yong-wei's tragic death follows upon months of unrelating racist taunts and violence against Asian Americans, including the senseless assault of 84-year-old Vicha Ratanapakdi in San Francisco. His daughter, who herself had been accosted twice in the past year and told to go back to Asia because, quote unquote, Asians caused the coronavirus, described her father as a very devout Thai Buddhist. His funeral held at Wat Buddha Nusorn in Fremont, California. So we wrote this thing, we know generally about the Atlanta incident, or about these elders in our community who've been just taking their daily walks and just assaulted. There's some video footage of, for example, Vicha Ratanapakdi's assault. There was somehow some camera footage of this attack from security cameras. And I think many of us were very disturbed at what happened. And of course, in Atlanta, this South Korean woman who worked, Yong Ai-wei, who worked at the aromatherapy spa, we would hear later about the government's explanation of why he targeted these Asian spas or massage parlors, and then the police chief's comments about how he just had the shooter just had a bad day, and I think it was an incident, March 16th. It's been happening, these things happen over and over again, but somehow that shooting on March the 16th in Georgia, it galvanized the Asian American community. And later, I think, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris also went to Atlanta to talk about this incident. I think it galvanized the nation because somehow the erasure or dismissal of these type of incidents by the authorities, saying that it's just somebody having a bad day, and it probably wasn't really targeting Asian people. I had a conversation just a few days ago with Tanahashi Coates, the well-known Black intellectual and writer, and he was like, in Atlanta, there's lots of strip clubs with African American people, like dominant, and the government didn't go there when he was talking about he had this urge to do these shootings because of his kind of sexual frustrations and so forth. But he targeted the Asian people, women at these massage establishments. And so I think people in the Asian American, we knew that there's something wrong when so many of these incidents, including Vichar Ratanapakdi in San Francisco, the city's attorney trying to dismiss it at like, this says, oh, it's, this person who attacked him, it's just something that we don't consider a hate crime in San Francisco. And so we've been listening to this kind of thing for so long. And so somehow in Georgia, when we heard about this, it I think brought us to some understanding that we need to maybe speak up. And for us Buddhists, we should speak up, not only because there are devout Buddhists that have been part of these incidents. It shouldn't really matter that they're Buddhist or not, but we do have a karmic connection to them in a certain way. And so, especially that particular individual in Atlanta, her sons are mixed race like me. They're half Korean, half Black. And they talked about their mom in a certain way that I was like, the impact on families when this kind of incident happens is just devastating. And so the call for this May 4th gathering, it falls on the 49th day of the Atlanta shooting. And in the Buddhist tradition, we believe that in many of our traditions in Buddhism, we believe 49th day after somebody's passing is the day when they transition or transform into, a different realm and leave us in a certain way. And we do these sutras and prayers for a safe journey. But it's also transformation for families that are left behind. And we have a very big family, not just the family in Atlanta, but the family in San Francisco, but our entire Buddhist family, our entire Asian American family, our entire national family. We have to transform and transition into something new. And so that's why we picked that date to have this gathering. Let me now go to the next part of the text. It says, our temples have also come under attack. 6 Vietnamese-American temples in Orange County, California were vandalized in a single month. An outdoor Buddhist statue was spray painted with the word Jesus at Hong Tik Temple. And more recently, at the Higashi Honganji Temple in Los Angeles, was damaged when windows were smashed, lanterns broken, and the property set on fire. So my good colleague in Little Tokyo, I am based here in Los Angeles, and I'm affiliated with one of the temples in Little Tokyo, Zenshuji Soto Mission, and one of our fellow temples down the street on 3rd Street, Higashi Honganji Temple, unfortunately last month experienced vandalism with the stone lanterns that are broken. The person tried to set the temple on fire. Fortunately, one of the Buddhist priests was inside and noticed and was able to be there quick enough to make sure the temple did not burn. But this type of incident followed all of these things just a few miles south of us in Orange County, 6 temples, Vietnamese-American temples in just 1 month. People were spray painting it, and as I mentioned, putting Jesus on an outdoor Buddhist statue. And so, sometimes our temples become the symbol of the Asian American community. It's what makes us doubly different. It's what forced, the Japanese American people back in World War II to have to go to these camps. It's like the conflation of race and religion, where, if you're Asian American but Christian, it's a little bit different experience than if you're Asian American and Buddhist, because these two things often get conflated as a doubling effect of othering from what is considered the norm in America of being white and Christian. And so we find it with our Sikh friends in the Sikh and Indian communities. We find it in any community where the house of worship or whatever kind of represents the kind of symbol of the community, a kind of standing institution of the community. And in Little Tokyo, we have so many Buddhist temples in one location. And somehow, I think in the community, we very much felt that this anti-Asian sentiment that has unfortunately happened in many of our cities around the country, our temple became the target. And these temples in Orange County, where it was so clear, where somebody felt that Jesus was the only way to, like, somehow Buddhism was an affront to them, that enough so that they felt the need to deface the temple in this type of fashion. These are the type of things that I think are worrying us, and so that's why we want to come together. And so the next paragraph in the invitation reads, "May we gather the pieces. In the face of nearly 2 centuries of xenophobia and systemic violence, Asian American Buddhists have long joined together to rebuild our communities. Piece by broken piece, we sutured the jagged edges of our altars, statues, incense burners, and our very bodies and minds back together. This mending is part of our Buddhist practice in America. Each act of rejoining reveals how compassion can arise out of racial suffering, how fragments are inseparable from wholeness. We mend them as declarations of our interconnectedness, as our expression of gratitude to our ancestors, as a way to cultivate the karmic conditions for American Buddhism's continued flourishing. This national memorial ceremony offers an opportunity for Asian American and other Buddhist communities to come together in mourning, mending, and renewal. We find support in the Dharma's enduring wisdom. We take refuge under the compassionate gaze of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. We counter violence with equanimity, ignorance with wisdom, hatred with kindness, and suffering with healing." So this is something where the work of repair, when these, sometimes it can be a physical assault, it can be a physical destruction of temple property, but oftentimes it's the psychic things that are causing these fractures and breaks in our very bodies and minds as well. And there's something very powerful that we have to draw on from the Buddhist tradition about how we heal that, how we can do that together, and how we can bring our Buddhist teachings of equanimity, wisdom, kindness, and healing to counter these other kind of poisons which may have entered our very existence. And so one of the things that, images that I've been using from my lineage and tradition in Japanese Buddhism, we have a practice called kintsugi. Kin means gold, and tsugi comes from the verb tsugu, to join or to rejoin. And it's a tradition that comes out of very classic ceramic craftsmanship traditions in Kyoto and elsewhere, where if you have, let's say, a family heirloom, like a beautiful teacup that you use for tea ceremony, or a plate that, unfortunately, by accident, it gets broken and it's all fractured. We use a special lacquer resin to rejoin the teacup or the plate, as opposed to just throwing it away. And not only do we mend it, repair it, rejoin it, we add a kind of gold lines on those fracture lines. We put this gold colored adornment to enhance and almost to record the history of that breakage, that trauma that made the thing break apart. And so it is in our, I think, Buddhist tradition that we have many ways to heal, many ways to bring together, many ways to rejoin, and that we do it in a, how should I say, a way that is not about trying to say it doesn't exist, but we have the clarity and wisdom to note things as they actually are. And that if we're hurt, we make a mark or we make a note of it. And before we can release and let go, we need to have a way of acknowledging truthfully some of these racial fractures in our nation that unfortunately seem to be ongoing. And so that's also something I think we can bring from a Buddhist perspective of how do we attend to those things. To me, that's a type of deep way of doing racial reparations. It's not just about passing one bill or getting some checks into people's hands. It's, yes, racial wealth gap, yes, direct payment. That's one part of the politics of reparations, but the deeper meaning of repair from a Buddhist perspective has to do with that deep work of how do we, whatever our ethnic background, how we inherit all the racial trauma. And by the way, racial trauma is not just African American bodies, Asian American bodies, it's white bodies too. All of us have different things in our psyche, our bodies, that need repair. And we can't do this. No one community can do it. Everybody has to come together, rejoin. And so that's the notion that I wanted to get at in this set of paragraphs. And so the next set of paragraphs say, may we gather to repair. On May 4th, 2021, exactly 7 weeks or 49 days will have passed since the Atlanta shooting. In many Buddhist traditions, 49 days after death marks an important transition for the bereaved as we pray for the liberation of those who've come before us. These ancestors will likewise alleviate our community's pain, for we are interlinked with each other across generations in our collective liberation. The hour-long memorial will take place on Tuesday, May 4th, 2021 at 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Our host for the live stream ceremony is the Higashi Honganji Buddhist Temple in Los Angeles. The temple, restored after a groundswell of community support, will serve as the sacred space from which we can enact collective transformation. We will chant sutras, recite the names of our ancestors, heal in ceremony, and share Dharma perspectives from leading Asian American Buddhists to repair an important aspect of our nation's racial karma. And so that's just a kind of restatement about the importance of why we're doing it, when we're doing it, and where we're doing it. 49 days is an important ritual moment for us Buddhist people about transition, about respecting and honoring those who've come before us, our ancestors. And the place is Higashi Honganji, this temple that suffered this vandalism and destruction, how we can come together as a sangha to rebuild from that very ground. So then the last paragraphs are this: may we gather to liberate together. The first Bodhisattva vow, beings are numberless, we vow to save them all, invites us to manifest freedom together. We welcome Asian American Buddhist temples and organizations, ally sanghas, and individuals of all backgrounds to participate in the ceremony by watching the live stream of the National Buddhist Memorial on May 4th and by endorsing this gathering. As the sutras remind us, spiritual friendship is Kalyanamitta, is the whole of the Buddhist path. We look forward to joining together with you in memory of our Asian American ancestors to cultivate belonging and liberation for all beings. In spiritual friendship, Duncan Ryuken Williams, Funisu, Chenzing Han. So we wanted to kind of offer this invitation, the three people I mentioned, in spiritual friendship, Kalyanamitta. This is, I think, the thing that's so important when we're talking about racial fractures and racial healing and belonging. It comes from friendship and spiritual friendship, when we can find friends from different backgrounds, being able, from a Buddhist vantage point, connect to each the other. There's something very powerful that we are doing. And in fact, this is, in our, I think, opinion, one of the only ways that we can, find collective or freedom together. That idea in, Shujo Muhen Seigando, we like to chant in Japanese way. Sentient beings are, innumerable, numberless, and yet we vow to liberate all. So that's a very powerful thing that calls us to, I think, come together in spiritual friendship to help each other become free together. We can't do it alone in our privatized way. We do it in a sangha. And so that's something that's also I've been thinking about when I think about what is independence, what is freedom. In the American tradition, we have the Declaration of Independence, and we start with "We the people." And I think for us Buddhists, I like to say, "We the sangha come together and do things together, gather." And so that's why our website is called www.maywegather.org. It's a invitation to come together as one American sangha. In this case, we're focused. We have many lenses, many mirrors, many things we can shed our light on about where the suffering is, and we are hoping we spend one moment thinking about this recent uptick in anti-Asian animus and violence, and we have this moment where we think about this as a deep question for us. And in coming together, I think we'll be like those potatoes that rub together, and in effect, I hope we will all become free together. So this is my presentation. I think I've done the 40 minutes that was assigned to me for the talk, and then we have 20 minutes for discussion. James, if I could ask you to come back. Oh, thank you.
Okay, I'm back. I sort of appear and disappear sort of randomly, so I'm back. Thank you, Duncan. So we do have some questions. The first one comes from Lucille, and she asks, as Buddhists, how can we deal with our feeling of anger when these racist crimes happen?
Well, I think this is how should we say, there's anger, there's frustration, there's just sorrow, there's so many, I think many kind of normal feelings when you see someone just trying to take their daily walk and somebody just, and they're an elderly person, you know what I mean? Like anybody's, grandmother, grandfather, just trying to go on their daily walk and then being assaulted and, happened to Vichara Ratan Bhakti, happened to Paco in Oakland. They're just trying to walk around and then people assaulting them. Almost sometimes it seems like a game. Sometimes it's, I guess, for trying to, take money off them or whatever it is. But somehow it does. I think anger is very normal when we see something like this happening where it's like, where are the manners in our nation? You know, this is a type of feeling that I think comes up. Uh, uh, there's just no honor in that kind of assault, you know? And so I can understand people have an immediate reaction, we get angry at what's going on. And I think this is when, you know, the Buddha's medicine and, you know, we have these things, but we can't sustain that anger for long because it's not so helpful. It's not skillful. It's not helping our families who are trying to get through things. So we have to find an antidote for those, and then help our own minds, but also help the people who are truly just distraught. How do we, you know, if you are, I don't know, I'm sorry, the name of the person who asked the question, but if you're a Buddhist priest, Lucille, if you're a Buddhist priest or a lay leader or someone, you know, when people experience that, even if it's not your own family, how can we have something worthy to respond, and how do we offer something that will help the families have a little bit of sense of, you know, in Buddhism, I feel like the two things we can do is we can either give wisdom or perspective, or we can give compassion, which is a feeling that we are interlinked to help people go through these things not alone, right? And so anger is not going to help with either producing wisdom or compassion. And so we do have to transition, but it's it's a very understandable reaction. And so we have to acknowledge this is part of the gold, that we have to make those lines. We are truthfully acknowledging things as they are. If anger arises, we can't pretend it doesn't arise. And it kind of arises very normally, but then there's a big difference between grasping onto it as the thing that's going to motivate you to do something versus opening our hand and saying, what else can we bring to the table that may be healing for not only our own psyche and bodies, but our friends who are distraught in that time. James, can I ask you for 1 second? I'm gonna come off for give me 1 minute. I'll be right back. I'm so sorry.
Okay, this is a Zen teaching here. Thank you for your patience. I mean, I again invite you to ask questions in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your screen. And thank you again for joining us. Duncan will be right back.
James, thank you very much for your patience. I had poor planning on my computer's battery life.
Okay,
so
don't worry.
we're back.
That almost happened to me the other day. You know, I was just thinking with this recent wave of violence, there was a woman who was attacked in Midtown, and it turned out she lived in my building, and the press was outside, and there are many Asian Americans in my building. And the building sent around a message of support to all of the Asian Americans in the building and said, we have your back, we're watching out. It was very upsetting. At the same time, I thought at a time when we cannot gather in traditional expressions of support, it seems to make things even more difficult, or typically people gather when things like this happen, and it's not an option we have. And I think you mentioned that once, I can't remember. Do you have anything to say about that? I'm wondering.
Sorry, James. So I'm understanding and you say about like if we are able or unable to gather
Yeah,
in
we're
a
not able to
typical.
gather in the pandemic. I mean, we can't, these traditional displays of support
Mm,
become challenging because we cannot gather, which is usually the natural human response
that's
to
right.
show support.
That's right. So in this uh, May 4th gathering, we are the we're going to have 49 Buddhist, monastics and priests and so to represent the 49 days, and that's in part symbolic number, but in part because the county regulations for this, LA area has a certain kind of percentage occupancy for indoor houses of worship, and so we're trying to keep so it is an unusual time. We could have had hundreds of Buddhist priests gather, but we're doing it in a little bit more limited format. And of course, the national live streaming idea is to be able to gather together in a way to show that support, even if one cannot be physically present in Little Tokyo, Los Angeles. And one of the things on our website is that we do have a way for different temples and individuals to add their names to what is becoming increasingly a wonderful wall of names of all these different people from sanghas around the country supporting this, saying, hey, we would like our sangha to know about it, to maybe even meet in small groups or different things to view this live streamed ceremony. And right now we're falling behind a little bit on the uploading of the names. So right now there's like 100 Asian Buddhist temples and 160 ally sanghas and several hundred individuals. But actually already we have about 3 times that number for all 3 categories. And we've only been up for a few days now. So by the time May 4th comes around, I'm hoping one way people can gather in these type of very unusual times is in fact maybe by not only participating by watching the ceremony and sharing that way, but also if by adding one's name, it can be a kind of I think everyone feels like, oh, there's some sanghas in the American South or in the Midwest or that cares about this thing, and we're going to try to come together as Buddhists. I think that's a very powerful way we can do something. So within these constraints, within these karmic constraints, we're trying to do something that people can feel to come together.
Okay, so Danya asks, it feels like there is an inevitability to the pain that has and will be experienced through the process of working through our nation's karma. Do you have any thoughts about that and accepting, bearing the suffering and or preventing it? So grateful for the work you do, shining light on our painful past and present.
Thank you so much. I think I always like to distinguish between pain and discomfort and suffering, hurt, and there are different ones where it's like it's sometimes it's the ones where it is what it's kind of inevitable. We have to deal with some of it, but it's a kind where if you don't deal with it, it's even more painful ultimately. And it may be not even in our generation, but we're going to just pass it on to the next one if we don't address it in our time. And this is actually how karmic inheritance works, isn't it? Like if the things that a certain generation didn't deal with, it gets passed on to us consciously, unconsciously, in our bodies, in our minds, whether we like it or not. And so if our tasks as Buddhists is to alleviate that pain, alleviate suffering, that is our dedication. I think from any lineage, we all are dedicated to, we call it a mountain of suffering, ocean of tears, right? So we are the religion that is all about alleviating that. And so I think one of the things that I've come away with is we have a responsibility in our time, in our generation, our present time, to do what we can with the knowledge that we will transform, we will, it's also, there is a lineage of people who have been doing this work, and we are going to join that lineage and do our part, and to the extent possible, not have to let it, cycle on. That's to me the kind of kicking out of the karmic patterns that constrain us and make us unfree. And so our path is about freedom, and our path is about doing it with the notion of sangha, or with the notion of doing it together, where it's not just about doing it together across different lineages or communities and ethnic background, all of that, but also we have to think about our ancestors, or our like, what do we come from? And also what are the exemplars and teachers and people who in the past who have done the hard work, who've had to deal with some of that inevitable pain, so that we don't have to have unnecessary pain, So we have to do there's some suffering, pain, discomfort that comes from doing this work. And it's also a little bit experimental, isn't it? Sometimes we try, and in Japanese we call it nanakoro byaoki. 7 times you fall down, 8 times you get back up. It's a phrase attributed to Bodhidharma in the Japanese Zen lineage, but it means like, not just like in meditation your mind may fall asleep, or you get whatever, and you have to kind of get back straight, but it also means like, in trying to do Buddhist practice, in trying to alleviate suffering, we're sometimes going to mess up and we're going to fall off the path. But that shouldn't defeat us. We fall off, we just get back up. And we will make mistakes. We will try to make spiritual friendships with different people. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. It's okay. It's okay. We just try, experiment, try, and get back up. And that's virya. That's our paramita of persistence. Sometimes translate vigor, but like, to me, it's about persistence of the path, getting back up, failing, getting back, and then that is the only way. And we'll go through pain, go through mistakes, go through embarrassment, whatever, in doing this work. But it's okay. It's just needed work.
You talked about kintsugi, and on the one hand, you have healing, mending, repair.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have the residue of that wound, or or at least a marker. How do we hold memory and healing in balance? Because so often memory will reopen a wound or hurt. So.
Right. So I think it's like, we sometimes, the Buddha taught us, right? Like, when the arrow hits you, don't worry about who made the arrow, what is their occupation, what is their back. That's a very important Buddhist teaching from the early suttas, right? You take the arrow out. So that's step number 1. We do the type of healing and practice where the things that are causing the greatest suffering and pain, we have to attend to that very practically. And so if, for example, repression of a memory is a practical response to stopping the bleeding, we do that, right? But ultimately, that's not going to fully heal that wound. And we do need to address and mark that memory in a way that it doesn't haunt us, right? And so we do have to come back to it, and we do have to address it, acknowledge it, and their letting go comes from that. But initially, it could well be that, a terrible traumatic thing happens as a memory of it that's not just about in the mind, it's in the body too, right? And we'd have to take Buddhism is a very practical religion. We take whatever steps necessary to take that arrow out. So there's always more than one step, and so I can see we have to, as you were saying, balance, or have to find a technique for for addressing these things on multiple registers.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. In your book, American Sutra, you describe solid evidence for the emergence of the uniquely American Buddhism when the Japanese were put in camps. It was clear that an American Buddhism had emerged, one that was very connected to, say, our democratic form of government and civil liberties. A lot of people don't know that by that time there already was an American Buddhism. Do you want to say something about that?
Sure. I always like to say that Buddhism, whenever it moves from one national context to another, India to Tibet, or China to Japan, or all these different places to United States of America, it has two things going on at once. One is it adapts to the new cultural context, and on the other hand, it also adds something new, a new perspective, a new way of practicing and being in the world. And those two things happen dynamically together. And what happened with Japanese-American Buddhists in World War II, they were doing both those things at once, right? They were bringing something new to the table, and they were also finding a way to adapt and fit into the things that would help to make their forms of Buddhism become very, rooted in the ground of America. And so democracy, all these things are, part of it. And so they did that, I think, probably accelerated by the questioning of belonging and who they are and so forth. But as they were doing that, I think one of the things that they noticed was that just like in Buddhism, we have certain ideals, certain values, certain precepts that we take seriously. And we know that maybe we can't keep them perfectly, but we make attempts to follow the path. And that if it's just words on a piece of a precept, list of that you're reciting or something, is different than actually manifesting, actualizing in your body, in your family, So we know that about Buddhism, and we should know that also about American democracy. All of these ideals in the American Constitution around equality under the law, due process, all these things that that particular group didn't receive in World War II, or freedom of religion for that matter. These are ideals that it's not just words on a piece of paper, but real people have to enact it in their own bodies and minds, in their own communities, in their own families, their own workplaces. That's how American democracy becomes real. And we have all a role to play in that as well.
Well, thank you so much, Duncan. It's always a pleasure seeing you and being with you. And thank you for your generous contribution, as always. Again, you can join Duncan on May 4th by supporting May We Gather, a National Buddhist Memorial Ceremony for Asian American ancestors. All are welcome. It will be live streamed at 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Learn more at maywegather.org. The link will be in the chat. It's there right now. I see it. So thank you, Duncan. Thank you for your generosity, for your teaching, for sharing with us today. And thank you to all of our listeners. And Duncan, I just want to say I particularly enjoyed your momentary disappearing act, because people said they enjoyed looking at the wall and just remaining silent. So that was an added bonus. We hadn't been expecting that.
All right. So, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to the Tricycle audience, and really appreciate the efforts of Tricycle and what it's doing the last 30 years. Appreciate this opportunity to talk about this ceremony that myself, Jenzing Han, Funisu have been trying to organize, and I hope some of you can join us there, and let's continue to work together as this American Sangha. So thank you.
Thank you so much.